I will just introduce our three speakers. I'll start with Aneta. Aneta Szyłak is director, head of Nomus, new art museum in Gdansk. Aneta has been curator across a number of institutions and held academic posts. She's currently completing a doctorate on curating context, the palimpsest of the quotidian and the curatorial at Goldsmiths London and the University of Copenhagen. Hiwa K, I suppose from the Deutsch, perhaps, based in Kurdistan and in Germany, has exhibited in many countries. And for those of you that are familiar with his work, you will know, and I'm sure this will come out in the presentation, that his work hits you at a gut level, at an emotional level, followed quickly by an intellectual engagement. His work is intensely collaborative, questioning the reconstitution of the subject in a ultra-violent world where I suppose boundaries are increasingly policed on the basis of skin color, and almost emblematic of his work this morning is I suppose a questioning of the format and a reconstituting of the format from what we've proposed based on a collaborative discussion. And we have Anthony Downey. Anthony is a professor for visual culture and Middle East and North Africa at Birmingham City University. A number of recent monographs include Hiwa K, The General Stork, Critique and Practice, Don't Shrink Me to the Size of a Bullet, the works of Hiwa K. And he's currently working on a book with a fascinating title for myself anyway, Unbearable States, Digital Media and Cultural Activism in a Post-Digital World. So I'm going to hand over to yourselves, guys. I know you have a range of questions, yeah, I'll kick over to yourselves. If anybody wants to start.
Thanks, Cillian. Aneta, would you like to jump in, or shall I just? You're on mute, Aneta.
Okay. Yes, I think you can start and I will slide in.
Okay. Hiwa, my friend, it's lovely to see you. We didn't have a chance to pick up beforehand, but I was saying to Aneta earlier, it seems like we were all together literally yesterday, and yet it seems like another lifetime. You know, it seems like it could be 100 years ago, it could be 10 minutes ago, but it's always a pleasure to see you, my friend. And, you know, it was funny, I went back and looked at our book that we produced in 2017. I went back and looked at a timeline of how you and I came together at a certain point. And I recall in 2008, coming across a show, I think a show that a lot of people saw at the time. It was a Manifesta 7. And for the audience, that was a show that took place in Northern Italy, in the South Tyrol, to be exact. 3 towns, cities, Fortezza, Trento, Bolzano. And there was one exhibition, Hiwa, and you and I have spoken about this. It was really extraordinary for me. That was the first time I came across your work, but also the work of a number of other artists that I ended up working with, including Renzo Martins and Teresa Margoyes. But I remember seeing Moon Calendar. And when you and I subsequently met, many years later, I think it was 4 or 5 years later, I realized that I knew I'd written a whole review of that show, but what I hadn't realized at the time was that the work I'd written the most about was Moon Calendar. And I recall at the time it was a strange sensation, because obviously when you do a little bit of research about Moon Calendar, that's the red security building. You and I have had a lot of private conversations about what that means. I'm not necessarily going to go into that now, but this was a place of unspeakable horror. and to perform against the red security building where Saddam Hussein had kept political prisoners, including children, was an extraordinary thing. But the performance itself was something very different, I felt. I felt there was something quite extraordinary in that moment of engaging with the resonance of such a space. And I use that word resonance advisedly because I think resonance has a lot of different play or different angles in your work. I'm thinking about the musical terms and so forth. But in that performance, and for the audience members who are not familiar with the work, I'm sure a lot of you are, Hiwa attached a stethoscope to his heart so he could hear his own heart beating. He then danced the flamenco, which was more or less percussively attuned to the sound of his own heartbeat. So what you get immediately is this Herculean task of keeping up with your own heartbeat, slowly but surely tiring yourself out, which becomes, dare I say, it's Sisyphean, it's pointless, it's endless, it's relentless, but it always collapses upon itself. And Hiwa, you know, I don't want to over-theorize. As I said, I don't think your work invites over-theorization. I think what it invites is a very thorough engagement with what practice does. What is it to perform? What is it to perform as an artist? But equally, Hiwa, what is it to perform the role of an artist? And again, this is something you and I have had many conversations about. What is it to present yourself as if you are an artist? And what is it to perform that role of an artist for the Western audience, for the non-Western audience? I'm just wondering if you could talk a little bit about the sort of pivotal role of performance in your work. And perhaps we can move it out from there and just think about other works that engage with performance. But the performance of the role of the artist in particular, I think this has been an interesting point for you and I over the years.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you, Anthony, for your lovely questions. You are always surprising with very good questions. This moon calendar first, it was unperformed. It was not performed. So it was unrealized as a performance. And it was an attempt to perform. And before you reach the point of performing, I gave up. So it was more or less sending my own body, who has lots of experience with that building since my childhood. And especially lately, I did my recent work between this building, and it was like I realized that 300 to the right was our house, and 300 to the left was our school. So I started to connect them with the 1,400 meters rope, going through the classes and the living rooms and all the torture spaces. So I have this experience since my childhood with this building. And it was kind of red building. It was kind of heart of the city. In a sense, it was supposed to provide security. It was called the security building, red security building, but was absolutely working the opposite. So after that, you know, when 1991, when there was a revolution, and the Kurdish revolution, I encountered that building completely differently. I don't want to talk about it, what I saw, but it was a new chapter of seeing, new chapter of perception. So it remained with me. And as I say, also, I'm not very intellectually approaching those things. I always use the word extellectual. So I was sending my own body to that building and trying to work something out, or, you know, to go through something, but also not pointing it, as I mentioned, always directly with my index, but how my body would react to that. So Anthony, did I lose you? You are not active, your video, but yeah. So that was the work which I was also interested in, that kind of researching my inner architecture, which is my body, from my heartbeat to my skin. And how could I listen to this and translate it into my ears, and then translate it into flamenco rhythms, which has a lot to do with the walking, with migration, with the, you know, horizontality of steps and not being unrooted. And then playing these sounds with my shoes, flamenco shoes, and measuring kind of space auditively. So measuring memory also, which includes memory also in that. So that was also an attempt of not realizing it as a performance. I never regret that I didn't do it as a performance there. So I'm back to your question. I'm not a performance artist. I see myself more, maybe Drogoff used this word occasion. I really like that word even more than event, you know. So it's whatever is happening and it's needed, I include my body. Once when someone saw my lemon taste of apple and told me, what's this? I say, it's an artist who jumped in front of his own camera. So this jumping in front of my own camera, it's my starting point always. And that's to my greatest teacher is my mother, who says, when we were cleaning like 5,000 square meters of land here, because I'm living in land, and it was like lots of things we have to clean. And she's 82, she cannot, you know, even barely stand. And she wanted to help me. And I had also like a back pain. So I said, Mom, we cannot make it, it's too much. She said, Hiwa, when the eye is afraid, yet the hand is already working. So this is my starting point always, you know, always eyes is afraid, but the hand is working. And also going back to view from above, also I'm talking about, you know, eye can reach astronomical distances, and hand, a voice can go a few hundred meters and hand go less than a meter. And so the question is how we give a vision to the hand, how we give an eye to the hand. And that's my starting point also, as I said, like in my works, very often I don't know what I'm doing. And the process of engaging with people, I've been taught all the time in my works. So that's, yeah, I hope it was not too long, and I hope it was an answer to a question.
Not at all, Hiwa. It's always a pleasure to hear from you. And in fact, you've raised quite a number of issues. If I could just break down maybe one or two of them. I think the thing that I discovered, you know, you and I subsequently met in 2015. I invited you to Tunis. We put on a conference at the Musée Bardo following the terrorist attack there, actually. And the thing that immediately occurred to me was through conversation and through engagement with you, and there were some performances and so forth, was the productive element of collaboration, going back to what Cillian mentioned, that collaborative impetus. But interestingly, and just to sort of remind you, you always, in many ways, created the opportunity for a conversation to happen. And I remember there was a lot of theoretization around that, about the sort of intellectual context. And you used to say, I'm not an intellectual, I'm an ex-tellectual. And I always loved that phrase because it positioned you as someone engaging in a participatory, collaborative process, but allowing that process to become whatever it would become. So there was a kind of productive inaction, for want of a better term. You were there, but you were not there. And I think this played a lot with the way in which you relied upon and encouraged a peer-to-peer engagement. And we can come back to this later. Given that we're in an education workshop, I think this peer-to-peer engagement is very important. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit about that strategy. And I know you've been very careful with that strategy. I think it's something if you overthink, it collapses. But that strategy of being present, engaging in a peer-to-peer environment, how has that influenced your work and the development of your work?
Yeah, that's it was also interesting when after my 7 years of break from art, I was a painter. I was very much interested in artists as a center. And again, when I'm doing this tap dancing against the heartbeat, then after a while, it's also, I'm decentralizing the heart as, you know, as authority. And then, so, and this sense of also collaboration is also how you can be a rather midwife in your work than an artist or someone who is dictating the others what to do. So it's I'm kind of, you know, moderating most of the time, like in Chicago Boys or that other projects. I must say also, I must admit that lots of influences happened through my encountering with Aneta Szyłak, who is now watching us, and she through her teachings in the Academy of Minds, talking about teaching as learning and teaching as learning as a form of learning. So it opened up also quite you know, different dimension in my practice. Of course, I had always these post-colonial questions and the role of artist as someone who comes from a completely different geopolitical background, who has a different geopolitical background than the Western art. And when she saw me doing non-art, when she saw me keeping my wall white for a year and painting it white once a while, you know, and standing there for 8 hours a day defending my wall, and then all these conversations happened. So it was quite interesting encounter in my practice, like the most important encounter actually. So this kind of being including yourself into your own project, you know, it always questions also that you know, idea of, you know, notion of authorship. You know, what's, you know, like artists are like dams, you know, for water. You know, they always cut the river from flowing, and they kind of erect it in a vertical way, and then they use the energy in a more strong fascistic way. They call it, it's mine. But actually we are always, you know, like when we call something it's mine, this river is always flowing. And maybe Aneta will talk also in her text about which apple could, and I'm living in a land, and now, you know, I have grapes, and we are all embedded into each other. I don't know, the grape of my neighbor is coming into my am I allowed to eat it? Because the root is there, but the root also I'm eating down. And yeah. So these borders always artist does. And for me, like to break that, it was very important to give the opportunity, you know, more to make a space. So I'm not interested in what's in the begging bowl. I'm the begging bowl. So you know, like what you can add, and you know, like we have also like some Sufis here. They go through houses and they knock at doors, and everyone will give them some food from leftover from their dinner or something. But they translate it. They put it the way they want, you know, they cook it again, you know, in a different way. So this bowl I'm more interested in to include, you know, like now Chicago Boys, we are around 180 people, and it's 180 voices, and it happened only through my invitation, not dictating anything. And sometimes they decide, like in France, in a village, we did it like a group of feminists. They decide they were around 70. They decided about a song which was very revolutionary, and normally I don't work in that way, but it was their project. They took it, you know. Yeah, this is it makes me very present in a way that I'm absent also, you know, not my ego, myself as Hiwa, but my approach. So it's to give space to the other voices, and again, it's a school for me. Again, every project is it might be very pragmatic also, that I'm learning from those works. As I mentioned, Aneta said teaching is learning, and it was like, for me, it was a form of learning.
I want to bring Aneta in, Hiwa, but before I do, just very briefly, given that we are in an education workshop, I just want to very briefly mention the peer-to-peer element, specifically in this digital environment, is crucial. And I'm thinking about Chicago Boys, I'm thinking about Cooking with Mama, how one utilizes the learning experience, how you engage the learning experience. I'm often reminded of Augusto Boal and his notion of creative disequilibrium, the idea that that moment of disequilibrium is a creative moment that generates its own processes of learning, its own moment of absorption. The problem, of course, is when you hierarchize it and you have a teacher or a lecturer or a group of speakers such as us here today, that becomes hierarchical. How do you horizontalize that experience? How do you encapsulate that experience? But I'm going to pass over to Aneta because, of course, Aneta was instrumental for you in thinking through some of these issues around learning and around teaching and around peer-to-peer engagement.
I also must admit it was a learning from me too. We are really learning from each other. And that was really very interesting because, you know, I also want to get back to that experience in the Academy of Minds because like Hiwa, when he started to go to that academy was already a mature person and an experienced artist who have taken break from his previous practice and started to practice music. And then in some point he decided to go back to the Academy of Fine Arts. And this is how we met. So we met at the moment of enormous transformation of Hiwa, who was not only a visual artist, but also a musician. And this tuning to each other or to one another was a key, I think, element of Hiwa's understanding of collaboration. And this is also very instinctive, like when the musicians are playing together, not everything is planned, not everything is expected. Like they listen to each other, and maybe there is more than listening. There is something like instinctive vibration that makes people create a good improvisation. So I think understanding Hiwa as a musician was always for me very important, that this is tuning. So we are not copying each other. We are not, I don't know, taking or stealing from each other. We are creating something anew, which is very much intertextual, interpersonal, and has to do a lot with what you call resonance, Anthony. So it's very much, and maybe this is some kind of acoustic intellectual zone that is not necessarily going through terms. Of course, we were reading things together, we were discussing things and going to lectures, but it has never been a reproduction of somebody else's thoughts. So it was not about submitting and ourselves, and especially Hiwa was not submitting himself into somebody's ideas, but rather reacting. So this is, I think, where the performance in Hiwa's work is. So this is this ability to have an immediate reaction. And when I work at, when I look at some of his photographs where he performs, then the photographs are just not really created, they are not invented with time, they are just documentation of the momentum. When he jumps on the fallen watchtower in Amnasuraka, for example, and there is a photo of him pushing this part of piece of architecture further down, or when he's fighting with the guy on the street in London, right? These are moments of reaction. And for me, this is very interesting, that there is not so much thinking through and going through an enormous process of designing. It's an immediacy in reaction on what's around. So this is like also acting in everyday life, but not the everyday life that is usually thought as kind of enduring our life or repeating our practices, but rather it's an immediate reaction to what is at this moment, at this very place.
Yeah, thank you, Aneta. I think it's very good that you add that. I would say also it's quite important for an artist when I do studio visits to artists, like nowadays artists, you know, they are reading all the theoretical stuffs from A to Z. And at the end, they say, why I cannot do work anymore? And I always tell them, it's like salt and pepper, if you are cooking, you don't have to add too much to it. So it's important when an artist does something, or in your practice, my relationship to knowledge would be, I'm listening through a wall, which knowledge is happening in another space. Maybe I'm too shy to enter, or I don't know, but the words I pick up sometimes, and in between things which I don't understand, I think from that moment, you start to improvise, and you start to wake up this poet in yourself, and you start to connect the things together which you didn't understand. And I think the complete understanding for artists can be, intellectual understanding can be very dangerous. It can be very harming to your own practice. Otherwise you will not discover things which you don't know in yourself. You never go into this unknown zone of unknown. So these things come from there, very often also, like I'm ready always when I do work, I'm ready for a oops thing, because I'm doing also lots of oops in my life and in my practice also. But that's shouldn't be a burden or a barrier for you to stop reacting to things in that intuitive way, because also, like, as I said, if art becomes too theoretical, too intellectual, it will stop breathing somehow. And I'm quite interested in Thelonious Monk, this bebop father of bebop jazz, who gives when they have concerts, he doesn't give the notes to the band till 1 hour before the performance. They don't know, everyone is in panic when they start to rehearse. So they have their first and last rehearsal before the performance. And that's when he says it creates different energy also. And that's what you are talking about. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to add that.
I wanted to also go back to this empty wall that was already mentioned at the Academy in Mainz, because it was very interesting that you were defending that emptiness of the wall, because Hiwa said that he had to fight. I have to develop that because each student was supposed to get the wall and work on it. This is what demand from the professor of painting, and to act as if they are already in the gallery and making a show on that wall. So the other people seeing empty wall and saying, oh, can I come with my painting? Can I install my things in that? And he said, no, this is my space. This is supposed to be empty. Maybe not my space. Maybe this is not about owning. I would say it is something that leaving that space for thinking or for figuring out your function as an artist, because I really like to talk about Hiwa's work, like his vision of himself. He always says he's a musician, but he has an artist function, right? So he's functioning in the art world, making artworks and being in dialogue in what is happening in contemporary art and in contemporary world, more world than art actually. But it is certain function through which he channels his numerous concerns and his numerous relations with people and knowledges. And that's interesting for me because it has to do, for me, I read it as something that literature already admitted, that there is no something like a singular author. Right? Because literature by itself is being rewritten and it's palimpsestic by its nature. And I think that Hiwa is one of the very few artists who are able to admit that what you do in art is actually the result of numerous relations and numerous levels of knowledge that finally become art, become visual, before become performative. I think
yes,
it's very
we
rare.
have it. We have that in music. It's exactly, there is no melody which is not taken from another word. It's so, and it's alienated in a way that you don't realize where it comes from. But there is not original melody, even if it's like, you know, it's stolen diamond, you know, from somewhere, go through this laser, all kind of cameras, and you manage to take it. At the end, it's a stolen diamond. So it's I was always going against my first 14 years of practice as a painter, and always thinking things are coming from my heart and coming from myself. And then I realize now, actually, I have to be unfaithful to this heart for a moment, and in order to reach it again. So I'm not against the heart anymore, but it took me like 20 years of practice to understand, oh, this kind of originality, what is yours. And also on another, if we talk about another aspect of my starting point with the white wall, it was about my disability as an artist, as someone who cannot participate in the art, because in the last 800 years, we were not present in history making. And that's doesn't give me the you know, the legitimation to make art as, for example, a German artist, or as a Swedish or whatever American artist. I'm not American. It's a very special case. But this kind of absence of history always made me in a position that I'm teasing things somehow, questioning them, steering them, you know, even playing jokes in case it doesn't work, I go out of it, you know. So it gave me this kind of elasticity, you know, like to still, I don't have a theory, I don't have a method, this special method to work with. More a smuggler strategy, more lending money from someone and giving it back to someone else from whom you lend again. So I think from our region, who went through all this colonial, and before that also, Ottoman Empire was also kind of colonial in the 500 years of that. So it destroyed like lots of treasures. And actually after the Sufi Ghazali, who started to destroy, after his book Tahafut al-Falasifa, you know, he ended philosophy in the Islamic world. We started to go to stop this engagement. So I was always asking this question, and by which mean I can be a part of this art production, or this kind of thinking production. So I was thinking we are only in the position of questioning things. We are always in the position of shaking that situation more than putting something stable there as a statement, you know, and that might be a statement by itself one day. So for me, it's a very difficult. Always, as a joke, they say, "How do you defend yourself as are you an artist?" I say, "No, 5'2" artist. You know, 5'2". So still not exactly artist 5 minutes before. So it's, these jokes I need, but it explains also what I'm talking about, like this kind of absence of history. And not only absence of it, but that it didn't exist, but it has been always looted from abroad, so from somewhere else. So that's where my work with the mirror starts, with pre-image. So it's like someone who's trying to use, you know, a different strategy. It's a more Western strategy where you go vertically in order to discover your scattered parts, in order to find out some traces from a few hundred years ago, which go through Greece, because we have lots to do with the antiquity and Greek philosophy also, and how it has been translated and given back to Europe through Spain. And it ended up with colonialism, and we shouldn't have done actually that, but I'm kidding. Okay.
Hiwa, could I take you back to something Aneta just said, and perhaps we could extrapolate from it, the notion of tuning. I think this is key. In fact, I think it's probably one of the key elements in your work, the notion of tuning resonances. I see it in the bell, but I also saw it very early on when we were thinking about this lemon tastes of apple. Now, I'm sure the audience are familiar with this work because it's a key work. But just very briefly, if I understand correctly, and stop me if I'm wrong, you interjected yourself into what was effectively an ongoing protest. Live bullet rounds, plastic bullet rounds, people were being shot at. You played a tune on a harmonica, which is Ennio Morricone's tune, Once Upon a Time in the West. And you and I have spoken about this. It's a fascinating story behind it because Ennio Morricone, when the film was being made of Once Upon a Time in the West, he insisted that each actor had their own tune. Hence, Charles Bronson ends up being the harmonica man. But he also insisted on the music being played when they were acting so that they could tune themselves to one another. Now, I recall when I first saw that film, this lemon taste of apple, you, through the harmonica sound, tuned a certain amount of people around you to continue with the protest. Some people gathered around you as you played that tune. And in fact, there's a wonderful moment in the film where there's a bit of a lull, everything stops, and then you start the harmonica again, and then they all start again and start rushing forward, and then there's some bullets flying and so forth. But I'm thinking about this notion of tuning, specifically the resonances of that. Could you talk a little bit more about how tuning works in certain works, such as the bell? Yeah. You can talk about any work you want, of course, but this notion of tuning, I think, is key because it's also to do with the vertical and the horizontal.
Yeah, very nice that we got back to this because I have to get back to something I forgot to finish, but also with the relationship, with the teaching and learning and this space in between this. I always, when I tune my guitar, when I start my morning, I don't tune the tones as such. I tune the distance between them. And that's very important. So that the artist, if we see every artist as a tune, and we see the interval as engagement, the engagement defines where the tone. So the interval always stretches in a certain way. Where this stretch ends, we call the end of this stretch a tone. We call it A to this, a to C, a to D, and so this, I learned from a gypsy guitarist, Rafael Cortes. He always told me, tune with intervals, never tune with notes. So it's so anti-nation, anti-nationalism, anti-image as similarity. It's so much about difference, trusting the intervals when it stretches and where it stops, it will mark the end of. It will mark the substance of the tone itself, which is completely empty, which goes beyond time and space. It's nothing because at the end, what remains is only interval and space between this. So that's, I don't want to refer to any, I'm not talking too much about the French philosophy. Maybe you've read a lot about that. Maybe I listened from the wall a little bit and I captured some words, but I found out with the guitar. This tuning, let's go back to Ennio Morricone. At that moment when he made this music, it was the first time he visited John Cage performance. And he was really very influenced by that because John Cage was using very special new, at that time, new mics and going through objects and sound. So at the beginning of the film is also very much about that. But this film also, many people have seen it in my country and it has been running in the cinemas for many years. And they know the story is very much about some people, some good people some good people trying to bring a railway to a village which is called Sweetwater. And if we think about America also commissioning Blackwater to bring democracy to Iraq, and it was exactly, it was all connected to each other. So playing this melody also, it was a moment where people started to understand that this process of Americanization, they call it the liberation process, it was only about liberating the market. It was only about for the rich people, liberation of rich people, because now slowly people started to understand this process of course, like Saddam Hussein was a bad guy and he had to go away. But we ended up with something worse than that. Like before, we had chemicals, and you know, they would use they would use chemical weapons that smells after apple, and now we have apple with pesticides, which causes so much cancer, and more than 5,000 people who died in Halabja. Now, you know, hundreds of thousands of people is getting cancer, and cancer got tripled in Iraq lately because of all kind of pesticides and this kind of Americanization for agriculture, you know, and turning to monoculture. And so that was, for me, was important to remind people of that music and remind people of that film. But at that moment where you start playing this tone, also you have somehow, you connect them again, you bring the interval between the individuals. And at that moment where, especially when the guy said, we stopped, because I didn't subtitle on purpose, but when we stopped playing and one guy says, we got a last final warning from the militias. They say, we are going to shoot you now. And we have to stop. And we say, what shall we do? I looked at the guitarist, he say, we can. I say, shall we go? He say, yes, we can. I say, let's go. And we go further. And that's why it brought also somehow, because the demonstration was about to collapse at that day, because it was the last day of 60 days of, we got this deadline. In 60 days, they will demolish the whole stage and everything. So, so the music as always brings this kind of togetherness. As Aneta also said, you know, it brings us into another level of connection, another level of also being together. Yeah, I'm literally, I mean it here. So yeah, that was for me. Tuning plays this kind of role also in Chicago Boys. Mostly they are non-musicians. They are very often they never played and they just play this song, or they, you know, from the voice they never had singing courses or practices. But together they make a good quality of music. Together they make something, you know, they're all hiding behind each other also somehow, which is always opposite to this ego, which, you know, like Jimi Hendrix, you know, going forward. And it's more about this dough, and music and tuning brings this dough. And as I said, if we compare or go from this point where I talked about tuning the guitar, you tune with the interval, not the notes as such, because in the note you have also the other note, you know, so, and the interval decides that. It's too complicated. I have to do it on the guitar one day. Yeah, but I think, did I answer?
Hiwa, you know, again, lots of things came up. I'm going to bring Aneta back in, but I just want to remind the audience of a very singular moment, very briefly. You mentioned about the grapes earlier. You mentioned about living on the land. When the US Allied forces invaded Iraq, the third order, after the de-Baathification of the party, the release of them from their own obligations and so forth, the third order was the so-called Lex Monsanto order, where they privatized seed production in Iraq and allowed Monsanto to engage in what has been a 20-year program of environmental degradation. And that's not even including the environmental degradation involved with the military war itself and the ongoing war. And I just want to remind everyone that that was an explicit element. And I know you're a big fan of the shock doctrine, Naomi Klein and so forth, disaster capitalism, break the entire infrastructure, civic, social, political infrastructure to enable a capital platform, a neo-colonial form of a capital platform to emerge. And so I just want to remind the audience that there's a reality to that, a legacy to that moment in 2003, which will last for generations to come. You mentioned cancer, for example. The figures are astonishing. I've been looking at it recently, truly astonishing. Birth defects in northern Iraq, astonishing again, far outstrip anything in the Middle East globally. But Aneta, would you like to come in, please? And I'm sure you have some questions related to what Hiwa just said.
I'm just interested in this notion of the land for many reasons, as I was number of times in Kurdistan, and I had Hiwa as my travel companion. That was really very generous, because I had this almost firsthand, not the firsthand, but almost maybe borrowed experience of the country destroyed by the war. I was also in other parts of Iraq later on. And I must say that among other discoveries that came through our collaboration, I started to really understand the war as an industry, something that maybe I was not fully aware, although, you know, we knew at least from Second World War that it is a business, right? That so many companies in Germany were involved in providing tools for warfare. But this is particularly interested in the countries where America goes for implementation of capitalism disguised as a democracy, because the greed of military industry demands market for that. So, and the war is a market. So, so only being there and seeing this overpresence of something we don't see here, right, in Europe. You have to get used to guns. You have to sit next to person with the gun. You go to the we went together with Hiwa and his brother, who is a military, who is a high rank officer, to the fields on Iraq-Iran border, the fields that are covered with enormous amounts of mines. And for example, there were artists who were making their living by disarming those bombs and not knowing whether they will come back home. And that was their everyday life. I think this all built my understanding that warfare, war industry, and production, military production, is a key problem of how the world is organized. Because even, of course, there is also like sources of energy such as oil and the control of certain countries because of the presence of unexplored oil beds. But first and foremost is also to feed a military production. So this is a vicious circle that comes over and over again. And there is a pollution. I remember Hiwa once delivered me documents from, that was German research on quality of soil in Iraq. That there was no nuclear bomb, but there was so much uranium used to propel the different rockets and other missiles, that the rate of cancer was enormous, started to rise immediately, that women started to miscarriage their babies. So something that was not happening because everything was clean, the nature was clean, the food was clean, everything was locally produced. So we are talking about the countries that is deeply devastated on every possible level, but because also with imports of foreign food that is industrially produced, and it's becoming a kind of fashion because like educated people are want to have these things, right? Because they are imported, they seem to be interested, so they are creating a lifestyle that is completely against what is healthy, and what was a big chance for this nation to thrive, right? Because everything was clean. They before the war, they didn't need to clean the environment. It was clean, right? No, excluding places, of course, where Saddam was pouring napalm or sarin or whatever the gas was that was poured over north Iraq. So yes, so this is like this enormous complication, and I think it really resonates very strongly in Hiwa's work. Even like Chicago Boys, of course, it's a key example because that was a collaborative project originally with many artists who were children of migrants coming from Middle East in 1970s, right? So it was an opportunity for Hiwa, but also for any other involved in that, to study how economic transformation is playing the key role in the political organization of the world. And this is more or less what Hiwa's work is very much about, right? About how we position ourselves as people who are shaped by particular economic and political condition. And so it is from being rooted in certain experience, then being uprooted as someone who is who has run away or was expelled. And this is when this resonance is happening in the proximity of these experiences.
Hiwa, before you come in, can I ask? We kind of started late, and I think it's maybe fine to kind of continue on this discussion for a while longer. But if any of the audience have any questions, just to pop them in the chat button too, and just to kind of if there is any. But yeah, if you want to respond to those questions about the, I suppose, the destabilization of the environment and everyday life at a profound and deeply unsettling level, and that have come up there from that discussion.
A question to Hiwa.
May I add something, or is there a question?
Do you want to add anything to that, to those points? Or?
I would like to add something to what Aneta also said, and Anthony. The first bomb, Iraqi-American war in 2000, the first bomb hit the Bank of Seeds in Iraq, and that's quite telling a lot. The Bank of Seed, it contains seeds from 5,000 years of the region. Might be more, because also like through some new archaeological findings, they found out that the history of the region goes back to 12,000 years ago. And they just found the places and where agriculture started. Even before house, there was temples only. There was no family, there was no house, there was temples. And it's very interesting also when through those sculptures they made on the temples, human beings were not in the center. Human beings were as seen as a part of other animals, not as a center. So this region has been very rich in that sense. And that's very important for Americans, first of all, to bring people into, like what, again, maybe Naomi Klein would call a shock therapy to zero, or kind of amnesia, to bring you to, to cut you from your own history. And it's such an important think that you deprive people from their own past, and especially from the seeds which they gathered for thousands of years. And actually, I wanted to start my talk today, which I didn't have the chance to condemn the aggression of Turkey yesterday and the day before yesterday on Mahmur refugee camp, which is near Erbil towards Mosul. It's Mahmur has been before there were many people, Kurdish people from Turkey, expelled and were brought somewhere which was middle of nowhere, and they just brought them to die there. And they many of them died, but like, it's very interesting how life resists death, like, very interestingly, they started to grow things, and now they built kind of a refugee camp, and they're very progressive. They're working on ecological terms, they're working on gender, they have schools, they have very interesting approach, which in the capitalist system, we would not see it, It's the same way as Rojava also is working on. Of course, for systems like Iraqi government or Kurdish government in Iraq and Turkey, Erdogan, all of those people, they see such models as enemies. And they started bombing yesterday civilians, and they killed 4 people, and many were injured also in Mahmur. And that was quite important to talk about. And internationally, it hasn't been talked. They say, like, Turkey attacked the terrorist group of, whatever. I think in the art world, we should make it clear that I'm not talking about the political parties, because I don't believe in any parties, because they always corrupt at the end. But it's about civilians who are trying to bring another model, which is against this Americanization, against objectifying of women, or against many things which we are suffering from. And they are trying to have their own methods of not using pesticides, chemicals to agriculture. They are using the green energy. They are trying, they bring back also certain kind of all the methods of medicine, which comes from, especially come from women there. And the role of women in the region was very important. And one of the things which I have to talk about is this a term which used genealogy. Gen in Kurdish means women. Genealogy means the science of, women studies, which is very important there. And there is aggression from everywhere against them. And I must say, like, these 2 models, which are for me still a bit romantic, because I don't know how they survive still in this. They try to teach students, kids, not to compete, but to collaborate. They try to learn, make decisions together, collectively. And such models, instead of letting them drive, we see it with our naked eyes. They are attacked with drones, with all kind of air forces and bombs, and ISIS also is attacking them. Again, so we are going through very big change here. Also, like there are new kind of grasshoppers which we didn't have before. And after the Americanization of the country, we have new grasshoppers, which no chemicals, Iraqi chemicals, can kill it. The only chemical can kill it is from Monsanto. You have to buy it from Monsanto. And it's quite interesting. I mean, I'm not talking about conspiracy theory. We are living it right now, and we are trading with it. We have to buy this pesticide too. And one of the most affected person in this world, in this country, is me, because I started 2 years ago, come to a land and try to heal the soil and try to be healed by the soil also somehow and work on it. But then I realized all my trees had been attacked by worms, by all kinds of aggressive worms, because all of my neighbors, they are using chemicals. And just guess where the worms would go? They go to their Mecca, which is my Mecca, which is my garden. So it's a failure. My garden is a failure, but also it's a very interesting study case for the villages and for the people. What will happen to you if you don't use these chemicals, and what shall we do? So this is my new I'm more interested lately in the last 2-3 years in coming back. And that's the reason also of coming back here to work with these things. But also it's not easy, you know, like, because before you had two models, you had government and the opposite of that were the neoliberals. And now we have the government itself is the neoliberal, you know, so they have their own court and they can accuse you immediately and they can judge you just by talking about, you know, by talking about something which is against the interest. Again, so that's, we are going through a very hard time now.
Can I, there's just one question has come in there, Hiwa, from Emily. If you think of yourself as an extellectual, how do you engage with the intellectualization of your work by academics and critics?
Thank you for the question. I mentioned before, as I said, the intellectual is happening in a room, and I just put my ear on the wall, and I just know more or less what's happening in the divan. You know, divan is the house of the Sultan, we call it. You know, where the things are happening. In Kurdish, it's a Kurdish saying, what's, you know, more or less what's happening there. Of course, I like to read. I like to listen to lectures. Sometimes I just spend hours listening to lectures of universities through internet. Thank God, I love YouTube. And when YouTube came out in 2006, I somehow found my own university. I thought it's but intellectual also cannot be only, you know, like you have to know Badiou or Rancière, but also you go through some certain kind of animals in Africa and see how they react to the nature. And sometimes you see some tribes somewhere else, you know, like they have a live video, and you just see it teaches you so much. So it enriches my lexicon day by day. So this, I am kind of engaged with that. But as I said, I don't want to be too much stuck in intellectuality. I want to stick to it, but not getting stuck in it. That's the strategy which I'm using. You know, I might make works which tickle some points for you, man. It can bring you back to a book of, for example, Production of Space, or, you know, something from Rancière, and you see, maybe he read this or something. I might read it, or I might just read a PDF or something small on it. But as I said, I don't want to get stuck in it. So it's important to first, it's not, I'm not making kind of aesthetical art as such, because also I'm not very much interested in that. But I don't want also to do it too theoretical, as I said.
Thank you. Guys, and we've had a wide-ranging discussion that ended up on very unsettling and disturbing points about, yeah, as I mentioned, the day-to-day lived reality of the, as I mentioned at the start, the ultra-violence of the neoliberal regime as it has been imposed on Iraq and northern Iraq. But during the various points, Hiwa mentioned about things not working and failures, and I think I failed in my primary task of keeping things to time, but I think the discussion was so engaging that that it could go on all morning, I'm sure, but I'm aware of time ticking on, and I know we want to report back at 11:30 with presentations from Aneta and Clodagh. So if we can maybe just adjourn at this point, and I'm sure everyone will join me in thanking Aneta, Hiwa, and Anthony for that discussion this morning. Certainly an enlivening and engaging and fascinating start to the Friday morning. So thank you guys.
Thanks, Cillian.
Is going to speak first. Clodagh has worked in collaboration with a number of artists. She's held residencies in a list of places, including the Irish Museum of Modern Art. Her work has been commissioned and displayed both nationally and internationally. As I understand, Clodagh's current work is been in the area of and working with people in direct provision, asylum seekers and refugees. And she's been working closely in that area and engaging with that. As I introduced Aneta earlier, but Aneta is the director of Nomus in Gdansk. Again, Aneta has exhibited and Aneta has been a curator of exhibits and exhibitions internationally, and has again, as I mentioned earlier, has engaged this at a collaborative level. So I'm going to start and hand over to Clodagh. Clodah's talk is in conjunction, I think, but you can correct me on this, with members of Crocosmia, again, a group involved in artistic engagement interventions with refugees and asylum seekers. So, Clodagh, I'll hand over to yourself.
Yeah, great. Cillian, thanks a lot. And just want to say I really enjoyed this morning, Aneta, listening to yourself and Anthony and Hiwa. Like, it's amazing. I'm really delighted to be here, and huge thanks to Cleo for inviting me, and for Jessica and Claire. And unfortunately, I was hoping to be in the museum there with my collaborators, Jean-Marie, Rukundo, Philemon, Marie-Claire, Mundi, Njong, and Siniša Končić, who I'm really glad that they had the time to come. But I had to stay here, so I'll be seeing them online. But maybe before I start, I have a quick talk. I'd really like to just introduce three of my collaborators. The first is Jean-Marie Recondo Philemon. He was born in Emoe, Rwanda in 1988, and he had to leave his homeland due to war. So since 1994, he's lived in the Jitara refugee camp, Tanzania, Desleka refugee camp, Malawi, Mitchell's Plain, Cape Town, and Hatchell Direct Provision Centre in Dublin. And Jean-Marie is currently living and working in County Kildare. So it's fantastic. I had an opportunity of meeting Jean-Marie in 2015, and we worked on our project together, and that's what I'm going to speak about today. We're also joined by Siniša Končić, and he's there in the museum, and Siniša is going to share one of his poems with us later on. And Siniša was born in Vukovar, Yugoslavia in 1967. He spent most of his young years in Vukovar on the Danube. He was educated in the capital city, Zagreb, where he finished university. After the war in Croatia in 1991, he lost everything and emigrated with his wife to Canada. But they were homesick and they returned to Europe. And since that time, in 2007, he has been living in Balbriggan. And I, again, had the pleasure of meeting Siniša in 2015, and we've been friends ever since. And he is an active member of an allotment and continues to write. And we also are joined by Marie-Claire Mundi Njong. And it's funny, I'm reading out her biog from our publication that we produced in 2017. And we have here Marie-Claire is a student of Community and Health Service at DFEI. Well, since that time, she's just finished her BSc in Health and Society in DCU, and she's going to be graduating this year. So it's great that Marie-Claire has given us the time in her busy schedule to come. Marie-Claire was born in the Cameroon, but she's now living in County Monaghan. So maybe I'll just share my screen and I'll give my talk. And Cillian, there were 3 parts to the talk, but I'm aware that time might be limited. So please jump in, tell me if I'm going over time, because with the projects that are quite multi-layered, and there's a lot to them, but please, I'm fully conscious of time. So by all means, just shout in. I'm not going to worry about that. Okay, so I'll share my screen. No. Okay, can everybody see that okay? That's okay, yeah. Okay, approaching an understanding of place. One bench, all my world. These are the first lines from Vukovar, Croatia by Siniša Končić, one of the poems that resulted from the project, The Plurality of Existence in the Infinite Expanse of Space and Time. This was a 3-year collaborative project. For Končić, a citizen of former Yugoslavia, the small bench is more than just a site. It's a place he goes to find meaning. As he looks across to the other side of the river, he asks, different country, same people, what kind of life is there? How does the lilac smell there? So my talk today reflects on 2 socially engaged projects, The Plurality of Existence, and I'll abbreviate it to that, that took place over 2 years in 2015 to 2017, and Crocosmia X that took place in 2017 and completed in 2018. And I want to speak about place in relation to these projects and consider how we might approach an understanding of place, not as a site or a geographically fixed point, but as a space of meaning. And this is a kind of understanding that's proposed by the cultural geographer Yifu Chun. And I really find Chun's proposition useful for me when reflecting on these works, but the motivations of my own practice in general, because he registers thought and emotion within the same continuum. And I think this is kind of very crucial to the way I see my practice developing, this idea of how we think in an effective way when we encounter art, and how feelings are all part of that. So the Plurality of Existence was a project I initiated with a group of individuals seeking asylum in Ireland, and many of them were living within the system of direct provision. And I did this in partnership with Spirasi. Spirasi is Ireland's only non-government organisation for survivors of torture who are migrants and asylum seekers. The artworks that unfolded from this project are also titled The Plurality of Existence. And as Aneta and Hiwa were saying, they weren't determined from the outset, but evolved out of a weekly gardening group that I established on the grounds of Spirasi. And again, as Hiwa was saying, I'm not a professional gardener. So with no teacher leading the group, we relied on each other. And this is kind of key. Our collective efforts transformed the garden. We planted apple trees, raspberry bushes, rhubarb, potatoes, onions at the back of the building, and fragrant jasmine, lavender, and herbs to the entrance of the centre. And over time, I believe we established a space of meaning for us, a shared space where tacit knowledge flourished. So this idea of tacit knowledge is what British-Hungarian polymath Michael Polanyi talks as a series of skills, ideas and experiences that is not codified or easily expressed. As Polanyi states, we can know more than we can tell. Developing on this, Polanyi observes that many individuals are unaware of the knowledge they possess. And I think this is the case for many individuals who have to endure the system of direct provision and whose agency and sense of self-worth has been eroded through social exclusion and isolation. For Polanyi, tacit knowledge is often only revealed in practice and through close involvement and cooperation. Our coming together each week gave individuals a deeper awareness of the value of their knowledge and contribution of the project, which began to take root. And this is the Mombrisha plant, the Crocosmia. So we formalized our collaboration with the name Crocosmia. Crocosmia is an abbreviation of Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora, a beautiful, vibrantly coloured wildflower that's known more commonly in Ireland as Mombrisha, back to school flower, or the Falcium Darrig. This plant is found all over hedgerows in Ireland, and it's in fact a hybrid of 2 African species, the Crocosmia aura and Crocosmia potsi. And we found this very corm of the plant in the garden of Spirasi. And we co-opted the name for the collaborators who had themselves been uprooted, forced to leave their homeland and create a new life in a foreign land. These vibrant flowers blooming in late summer in the Irish landscape offered a symbol of hope while demonstrating how diversity enhances place. And what I found really kind of fascinating about the Crocosmia was that I was referring to it as a native flower, and it was only later we realized it was from South Africa. So it has this kind of interesting duality of questioning what native is. The Crocosmia collaborators are Marie-Claire Mundi Njong from the Cameroon, who's here with us today, Siniša Končić, former Yugoslavia, Jean-Marie Rukundo Philemon from Rwanda, who's here with us today as well, Aneta Mafale from Uganda, Saida Umar from Pakistan, and Peter Recondo from Rwanda. My motivation for initiating the project was to engage people who have had to endure discriminatory system of direct provision. I wanted to create a space of representation, a space to represent hidden narratives from the unique perspective of those who are not represented in or by the legislative, cultural, and political frameworks within our society. I did not anticipate or place the poem in this project. And here's a photograph of Jean-Marie and Peter. It was Jean-Marie's poem, War Child, that he read to the group one afternoon, which instigated a point of departure. So it was Jean-Marie's kind of brave poem that inspired the group to embark on their own exploration of poetry and begin writing, which in turn resulted in a much more ambitious, far-reaching artworks that were a series of site-specific audio works transmitted under bridges in 4 cities in Ireland. The poems of the members of Crocosmia recited by their author in different languages, including Luganda, Urdu, Croatian, and French, and their translations in English, echoing across the rivers and bays. These works were also presented in an exhibition of these works in Visual Centre of Contemporary Art, Carlow, and this was really important. It was important to get the works into the public realm, but also into the institutional space of the gallery and the museum. And for me, it was about crossing over these thresholds. And an anthology of poetry that was launched in Pearse Street Library by Senator Alice Mary Jane Higgins. So I'm going to draw on one of those French philosophers, Alain Badiou. And I'm talking about him because he locates art as the site or the place where truths emerge. And in the handbook, he reflects on the poems of the Arabian poet, Labid Ben Rabai, and the French poet Mallarmé, and to speak of the poem as a special regime of thought, an open process that initiates a space for the emergence of truths. Although we did not set a theme, the poems of each of the writers all speak about place, both explicitly, particularly in the final lines of Marie-Claire's funeral, Cameroon, home again, when shall I see my home again? And implicitly through the language and operation of the poem. In Siniša's poem, Vuk over Croatia, he uses the words Končić. And during the editing process, this word was replaced by the proofreader with the word susjed. What I later found out from Siniša was that Končić is of Turkish Muslim origin, whereas susjed is a Slavic Christian word. That these different words were interchangeable highlights the closeness and rich diversity of culture in former Yugoslavia that was, in Siniša's own words, a country torn apart. What is even more pertinent is that these two words, Končić and susjed, when translated into English, mean neighbor. So the publication of the poem and its distribution extended the project in scale and reach. And it brought these writers to a wider audience. So we were participating in interviews on the art shows on the radio, and we were invited to participate in seminars and conferences. To ensure the poems remain open for the reader's imagination, no images accompany them. Instead, the designer John Sherwin and I use cartography to reference place in the design of the book. Contours of countries where the poems are set afloat on empty pages throughout the book. They're isolated from their place on the map. These linear forms symbolize the experience of the asylum seeker disconnected from their homeland. And poetry offers a bridge that connects back to the homeland and extends out to the other. These dual notions of bridging back and extending out are suggested by an area that appears on the cover of the book, a representation of the 7 countries that coalesce and come together, contours slip, so that borders superimpose onto one another, rendering them obsolete. This represented space, and indeed the project as a whole, sought to advance an alternative conception of community that is centered on relations that are formed across categories of nation, race, and culture. So through their contribution, the unique voices of Crocosmia offered a new reading of community that is not determined by sameness, but one that admits and embraces the plurality of existence. So Crocosmia X is the next chapter in dialogue about diversity in Ireland, and use the poetic device of metaphor to encourage the public to re-examine received notions of native and foreign. Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora not only offered a symbol of hope, but also a gentle reminder of the challenges endured by those displaced by political, social, and environmental issues. So now with this project, it was 2017, and the members of Crocosmia had moved on. I mean, Marie-Claire was embarking on her academic career, and Saida and Annette had got their status and were busy looking after their families, and so everybody was busy. So I was very fortunate to meet a new group of people while still in close contact with the other members of Crocosmia. So I got to work with Hala Faranda Wood from Iraq, Ragad Faranda Wood from Iraq, Papi Kayoa Kasanga from Congo, Mohammed Fadi, Iran, and Fatima and Romeo Kimbambe Katangwe from the Congo. And we aim to cultivate Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora as a positive affirmative metaphor for diversity in Ireland through participation and exchange. So we extended out of our place of work beyond the garden of Sbarassi and brought our creative activities out into the wider community. So we sought to share a metaphor by including others in the realizations of the artworks. So instead of purchasing the plants, we exchanged poems for specimens of the Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora. We issued a call for this in the Irish Times, and gardeners from large garden estates, rural farms, suburban gardens, and inner city backyards responded. And in exchange, they received a copy of our anthology of the poetry book. Although time-consuming, this process of collecting plants from gardeners created small, intimate moments for conversations to open up, and coming together with others created momentary spaces that allowed us to share our metaphor and its meaning. We extended the project by connecting with local schools, D7 Educate Together in St. Paul's Secondary School, the Brunner and St. Joseph's Secondary School. And we developed a series of workshops centered on metaphor. And by situating these outside, they were kind of physical, gardening and reflective reading and discussing the poems. And it was really beautiful to hear like inner city girls reading Annette's poem of, you know, purple bananas, something that was so normal to Annette, but so fantastical to us here in Ireland. But it was outdoors and away from the formal classroom, and that really opened up our conversation, and it seemed to resonate on a deeper level. So the invitation to uproot our activities from the garden of Sbarassi to the nursery of Emoe from curator Janice Hawke and the head gardener Mary Conlon linked the participants to the museum. And although they had never visited this place before, the staff at Emoe made us feel so welcome, so much so that Mary, the head gardener, let us use the nursery every Friday, and we just had it as our own. And this was actually really significant to the project. It was just this beautiful space that we were welcome to use every Friday became our place. So it was that actually that having that place to call our own has informed me now with my next kind of body of work of establishing these kind of places. So the project spoke about ideas of inclusion and belonging, but being together in the nursery at Emoe made these ideas palpable. And I know Hiwa was talking about the land and, you know, how after the war with Monsanto, you know, all of the problems. And I know Hala and Ragad were telling me all about this too. And just being there working with soil. I mean, there is a term called biophilia that it's scientifically proven to make you feel good. And I mean, at the time I was pregnant, and I was so lucky that Pappy had come from a rubber plantation, and Pappy was hugely instrumental in kind of doing so much of the work. And it was just working in the garden made so much sense to us. So there we are there. So the artworks of Crocosmia are situated in TU Dublin and also in Emoe. Our intervention of planting these wild flowers to surround tiered concrete steps by the playing fields and by an old metal bench at the front lawn at Emoe has transformed these once neglected sites into intimate spaces for people to sit and meet. The permanent signs beside the artworks acts as a reminder of the metaphor of Crocosmia, a metaphor for diversity that appears every summer with the blooming of these vibrant plants. The names of the main participants are listed on the signs beside each artwork. So in acknowledging their contribution to the project, this gesture bears witness to the individual's capacity to create meaning through the creation of artworks in an unfamiliar foreign place. Their willingness to share their collective creative activities to the wider community extended this space of inclusion and belonging to others. And like Končić's bench, Crocosmia X reminds us that we can approach an understanding of place not just as a fixed site where the artwork exists, but as a dynamic experiential space where concepts of inclusion and belonging were cultivated, explored, and felt. So this is Marie-Claire at the launch. I don't know if we have time just to tell you what's happened to that plot now. Cillian, do we have time?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so Cillian had mentioned that I'm in a studio in Emoe, and really that was to re-engage with the plot Crocosmia X. And I've been working on a project. I've been working on kind of two tangential projects, Seed Studios and Reflections on a Radical Plot. And it's an ecological process-based project. So now being back in the studio in Emoe has given me the opportunity to re-engage with Crocosmia X, giving me time to observe and reflect on what we did not foresee. The quiet evolution of this artwork through the natural process of self-seeding and seed dispersal. This small plot where we planted Crocosmia X Crocosmiflora in 2018 is now home to a diverse range of plant species. And I'll just mention as well what's kind of fascinating about the Crocosmia plant is that the Irish Department of Agriculture define it as an invasive species, but the National Botanical Gardens don't see it as that because it's not wind-borne. So there's also that kind of interesting way of looking at these plants, and any botanist I've spoke to has said, oh no, this is certainly not invasive. So it's kind of fascinating, and I think as well this plot kind of proves that the Crocosmia is not invasive because it has let all of these other plants in. So it's now home to a diverse range of plant species. These include nettle, forget-me-not, primrose, herb robert, plantain, nippleworth, prickly sow thistle, common thistle, opium poppy, wild violet, western willow herb, to name but a few. So in a sense, this small plot reaffirms that diversity is the natural state of being. So Reflections on a Radical Plot considers the value of these weeds, as I say, as a resource and ecosystem. And I've been working with Sandra Murphy, an ecologist in Emoe, and Charlotte Salter Townsend, a botanist at the National Botanical Gardens, identifying these distinct species of plants and archiving them using an ecological printing process. This process draws out the plant's natural dyes that is transferred or saddened onto paper. And it differs from conventional forms of archiving plants, for example, illustration that is determined by the technical skill of the artist. So in a sense, I'm kind of collaborating with the plants. The printing process is not reliant on my technical expertise, but on the composition of the plant itself. So unlike other forms of printmaking, results are unpredictable. And I find this kind of really exciting. And to me, it has a poetic quality because it acknowledges nature as potent and how living things still tend to defy our definitions. So although we've defined these classification system, this ecological form of archiving acknowledges that being is a process and is not static. So what I'd like to do is, I can see Jean-Marie is here, and I wish I was there because we were supposed to have lunch, and just with this, we were all sick in my house, so I've had to go online. But Jean-Marie, I'll hand over to Jean-Marie, who's going to read out the poem that inspired all of us and changed the course of the project. And I'm so privileged and honored to have met Jean-Marie, and Jean-Marie, I'll see you soon. Hope.
My first poem reads, Gitari Refugee Camp in Tanzania. December rain. Mothers standing in their doorways, looking as children pray outside. Children praying without their tops. Children chasing each other. A football made from old plastics, bags tied together. A beautiful day of rain and sun. Some people believe that hyenas are having sex, or that the sun and the moon are married. Evening of the day, the moon will guide the children in their prey. Front doors of the houses left open for the children to run in and out. Whether hungry or not, for this day, joy and happiness makes you full. This was the time that all children came together to pray. Oh, this was a big event. The second one, a war child. Miles of walking, days, months to years. Baby becomes a shield to her mother. Baby shot on mother's back. Mother does not realize the child is dead until it is time to feed her. No time for mourning. Mother is a shield to her child. Mother is dead and the child is still on her back. Only hunger brings death to the war child. One war child lives on to tell the story. He is supported with his sadness to give joy to others. When he eats, he gets to forget himself and for a little while becomes joyous and happy. He never wants to be listened to before listening to others, for he holds a candle for others. For the experience is the best teacher, no exams, but he passed to live on. Thank you.
It is my big pleasure to be here and to read one of my poems. Vukovar, Croatia. One bench, all my world. I'm enjoying watching the Danube in springtime. It's so huge and fast and encourages everything. I'm smelling lilac. I'm smelling the Danube. I'm smelling spring. Above me, the sky is so blue. Look, the river carries a bottle, maybe some secret message inside. How long has it traveled? I see a small rowboat cutting through the river. Inside, it's my neighbor. He's coming home from fishing. Smile on his face must be a good catch. I look over to the other side of the river. Different country, same people. What kind of life is there? How does the lilac smell there? The memories come on and I can't stop the tears. My mind is elsewhere. I didn't notice the sky become gray. Everything now flying around me. The bitter taste in my mouth, Košava from Danube. I know the wind will bring sudden rain. I hurry home. Thanks.
Cocorico, cocorico, cocorico. The cock crows. Everyone is excited to wake up to do the house duties. You can smell the fragrance from the food preparation. Plantains with bitter leaf and a good amount of red oil. The family asking for the girl's hand in marriage arrive carrying plenty of food. The ceremony begins. The two families sit opposite from one another as if they are having a debate. One member from the demanding family stands up. We want your daughter to be one of us. The girl's family asks for a lobola, a certain amount of money, some cows, chicken, goat, oil, fabric, farming tools. Once paid, they will identify the girl. After all is said and done, the union begins. Everyone is seated in the yard, this time in any order, all beautifully dressed. The food and the drinks are arranged on the tables. The bride is given a cup of white mimo. She dances around the crowd, taking her time to choose her man. The men joke, trying to have her choose them. Eventually, she kneels in front of her man and offers him the cup of white mimo. The couple stand and make their way to the head of the family to receive their blessing. The festival begins. Eating, drinking, dancing, and singing. Which kind soup, mami cookam? I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Which kind soup, mami cookam? I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Salt no day, pepper no day. I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Which kind soup, mami cookam? I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Tell am say I no go chop am. I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Which kind soup, mami cookam? I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Tell am say I no go chop am. I am a soupe, I am a soupe. I am a soupe, I am a soupe. Funeral ceremony, Cameroon. Bong bong, bong bong, bong bong, bong bong. 4 a.m. in the morning. Everyone is awake to the sound of the town crier, announcing the ceremony of a notable man. You can hear the women preparing their pots to put on the fire. The men breaking firewood because there is going to be heavy cooking. You can see the children sweeping the place with bamboo brooms. It's time to get ready. You can get the smell of the achu cocoa. The cocoa yams are ready for pounding. You can hear the sound of the heavy pistols in the mortars, pounding the cocoa yams. While some of the women will be busy warming the plantain leaves. When everything is ready, in the achu is put in the plantain leaves and rolled. You can also get the smell of the kanda, cow skin, intestines, and toil meat, stripe. You can see the women warming the red oil to get the achu soup ready. They put in some akanwa, limestone, with the water from the meat and oil, and it gives you a yellow soup called achu soup. At 2 p.m., the ceremony has to start. You can see the women from other neighboring villages with baskets of food on their head. You can also see the men carrying calabash of white mimbo, palm wine tapped from palm trees. Traditional dance, the juju comes out wearing masquerade. You could hear the sound of the drums and the balafon. You could hear the sound of gunshots and the smell of gunpowder. It's almost 5 o'clock in the evening, and you can see the sun setting. Everyone has to leave. The women carrying their empty baskets on their heads. The men carrying off their empty calabash, singing native songs and English songs. Home again, again, home again, again. When shall I see my home? When shall I see my native land? I will never forget my home. Home again, again, home again, again, home again, again. When shall I see my home? When shall I see my native land? I will never forget my home. Home again, again, home again, again, home again, again. When shall I see my home? When shall I see my native land? I will never forget my home.
Thank you guys. Thank you, Jean-Marie, Marie-Claire, and Siniša, and Clodagh. I want to hand over now to Aneta.
Thank you. I decided to read from my essay called Your Apples Fall into My Garden, 3 Trials on Estrangement. It is a small letter. It's epistolographic part of a larger essay in which I was trying to circle around the new definition of estrangement. And this was a part of our project with Hiwa called Estrangement. We made this exhibition on Edgware Road in London at the showroom in 2010. And later, a year later, we show this exhibition, group show of Kurdish artists in Gdansk as a part of Alternativa festival I once directed. And that was, I think, first such an attempt to show art from Kurdistan in an international context. And we were at the time very much preoccupied with what it means to be strange to one another, and what's the potentiality of not knowing each other. So and this essay is a 3-part, and in the first part, I described the meeting with my PhD colleagues on Gloucester Road in Pret-a-Manger, and I'm talking during this meeting to my friend Cihat Aring, who is a Turkish intellectual and film theorist. And he's talking about Taksim, which means the division, but can also mean the the crossroad. And this is something that I found productive in approaching what estrangement could be, that we are meeting on the crossroad and there is a potentiality of that meeting, but it's necessarily defined. And that in the second part, which is called Making Strange Found Strange, I described my meeting with Boris Buden, who is a Croatian theorist, political theorist, and also a translation and translatability theorist. And when we were talking about estrangement, he told me, look how the foreign is absorbed as the foreigner is rejected. The need of the foreign is the need to expand the possibilities of the familiar, but it doesn't mean that the one who brought the difference is welcome. And that was another very engaging and fruitful, I think, way of thinking about this fascination with the other and the rejection of its proximity. And it ends, the essay ends with something that is a love letter. So I try to use a poetic form to approach something that cannot be grasped, but we know that is there. And this is very much about inevitability of longing. And I wanted to bring back this short text in the context of pandemic, and how this makes proximity, nearness, intimacy impossible. So this will be my short one-page contribution to our morning. So I'm reading from Your Apples Fall Into My Garden, 3 Trials on Estrangement, and this is chapter 3, an unsent and unsigned letter. So now I must unlearn you, my dearest one. Engulfed by love, longing, and desire, we have to delete from one another, cell by cell. Bifo says we have to start desiring each other and become a body again. But since we are to be apart, there will be no body aside from the one we are losing, the estranged ones. In which sense is this being apart more of potentiality than being together? Estrangement is related so much into longing in incompleteness. It gives us a continuity which shared life isn't giving us. We do not yet know when we will touch one another for the last time, when it will happen, but the inevitability of it was in the first time we touched one another. Estrangement is a refusal of giving way to evaporation of what has brought us together, my dear one. In my country, the law says that if fruit from a tree falls into your neighbor's garden, they belong to her. We let apples from our trees which have fallen into each other's garden. My apples in your garden, your apples in mine. And they keep on falling, but it isn't certain for how long. So what shall we do, dearest one? One can picture them. One can pick them and eat them up, or let them rot. to watch the new tree that is growing from the seeds of your apples. Your apples are falling into my garden. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Aneta. I don't know if any of the audience has any questions for either Aneta or Clodagh. Or I don't know, I see Hiwa managed to get back online again. I don't know if Hiwa wishes to add anything else, or if anybody has any other general questions.
Yeah, I was just thinking there is no difference between the neighbor and its soil. There is no such thing as rotten and letting the apple to rotten. Because in Kurdish, we say our whole life, the whole life, we knock at the door of the soil, and at the end, it opens its door to us. It might sound a bit poetic, but I think if the neighbor doesn't eat it literally, the soil will eat all of us. And that's, thank you for the poem, beautiful poem.
Thank you. I wanted to add that actually what I try to put into the text is that if the apple is rotting, it gives food for the seed to grow.
Yeah. So
we might not be picking it up, but we are cultivating something to grow. So it's about, let's say, letting nature to do its job.
Could I interject and just kind of an open question to Hiwa, Aneta, and Clodagh? I remember, Hiwa, whenever you mentioned Thelonious Monk, in passing, and I'm always reminded there's a couple of famous quotes from Monk. One is that there's no wrong notes, only wrong resolutions, and the other one, which I don't know whether it's him, but I'm going to attribute it to him anyway. When he said, you can't play wrong notes. If you play the wrong note, just play it again, play it a second time, and by the third time, the audience thinks that you meant it. Which brings to mind a kind of a connection between what the three of you were talking about and what happens. Well, not you weren't talking about it directly, but it kind of wove in and out of your three interventions this morning, and that is what happens whenever things go quote unquote wrong. It seems to be that the wrongness, the mistakes, the obstacles, the pitfalls, the unintended or unexpected things that occur by chance are also a fruitful opportunity for even further disruption or further wrongness, if that's not too far of an extrapolation from what you were saying. And I was wondering, has anyone got any suggestions about what happens when things go wrong?
I have a nice little story that Marie Claire will appreciate. And when I first kind of approached Marie Claire with the idea of coming on board a project, initially I wanted to just capture voices, and rather than asking for testimonials from people, which I felt was not my role, I was going to use a strategy borrowed from Yoga Nidra, where words are just used and they're highly evocative words. So, usually in Yoga Nidra, it's an Indian yogi, and it would be kind of very Indian centered words like standing elephant or a seated lotus. And so I thought what we do was do a yoga nidra session together in Sparassi, and sure little did I know that we were on a dusty old carpet, and it was a complete disaster. And I don't know how Marie Claire didn't just say, go away, I never want to see you. But in a way, I think that kind of absolute failure of, you know, something that was supposed to be something that would get us to some sublime level of understanding actually brought us kind of closer together. And, you know, whereas other people were kind of looking kind of skeptical at the project, you know, I think she thought she'd like to come on board. So like sometimes the disasters actually bring us together, I found.
If I may answer you or add something. I always thought like there is coming back to the soil and apples, Aneta's apples. And to what you are saying also. Actually, everything is going wrong. We have to admit. We are in another chapter in life. And we cannot stop the ice from melting. And we are going to have hundreds of millions of people who try to immigrate north, which by itself, it's a renaissance of right wing in the West and in these countries too. I don't think if there is something going right. But always I was thinking, one of the spiritual teachers told me something very nice. I liked it. He said, we always think that life is opposite of death. Actually, death is opposite of birth. Life doesn't have opposite. So life is going on. I think playing wrong notes, you can play wrong notes, but the rhythm, it should be right. You cannot play wrong rhythm. So you can break a rib, but you cannot break your backbone. So that's, and I am going through this situation lately, last 4 years, where I had kind of, you know, I had kind of push from the art world, and they want to make me a star somehow. And I was just missing my being a moon or half moon, you know, and I made a U-turn to my half moon and came back to work with people. And we know that things are all wrong here, you know, like it's so much wrong. Sometimes if there is nothing, like I always quote Muhammad who says, when you want to make a change, a resistance or revolution is talking about, so you start with your hand, which means revolution. And if you don't have the opportunity, you go to the tongue, which means protest and critical art and, you know, social engaging art. And if you don't have the chance, which we don't, because we tried it, and I'm sorry to be so negative about it, but we see the last 50 years, we didn't make so much changes. We did changes, but in the wrong direction. We didn't, you know, all the biggest changes happened the last 50 years, you know, globally and in all the aspects. So he says here, you go to the heart. And that's what we are going through now. And that's why also, whenever I try to talk about my own works and, you know, my approach, how it was from the second stage. The first we can forget about it completely. And I'm between the second and the third stage. Sometimes that's why I mentioned to, you know, becoming a nurse, because there are so many people who need help and need to be healed, you know. And that's why I'm thinking your question is, what if everything could go wrong? But I just wanted to say that it's already wrong. I don't know. Yeah.
And I'm just thinking, Hiwa, of your mini orchard in your garden, and how you're saying all the insects are coming over. But in a sense, like, rather than, you know, as you said, seeing it as a bad thing, it's like you've created a sanctuary for all these poor insects that need a home. Like maybe you know, it's not so bad that your apple trees have black fly and they don't bear fantastic fruit, but like you have created a sanctuary for all those poor insects in Iraq that have nowhere to go.
Yes, exactly. I just want to show you something nice here. I have a garden for the worms because they are visitors, they are strange, you know, as Aneta said, they are strangers are coming, and I collected lots of from my trees oat, no, and they have worms, you know, and some of them has 3 holes. And very interesting. Sometimes when they fall, I try to eat some of them because you shouldn't eat the ones with the worms. Oh, you can, but I just don't want to disturb. But yeah, but sometimes they fall and they are so sweet. You know, they fall from the hole and I just keep the hole and we have a communication. They just go in again. And I see them as domestic animals now, you know. Like my chickens and pigeons, you know. That's you need to be double negative in order to achieve certain kind of positivity, you know. that's where there we are now.
Yeah, I'm just even thinking of the plot in Emma, and you know, I was told, oh, should we clear out those weeds, and it was only, you know, we thought, no, this is the way it's meant to be. They're not weeds. They're, you know, this is the way it should be. It's, you know, people think everything has to be maintained and kept in a time capsule, but
yes, one of the criticers, his name is Stanger. What's his name again? Sven Stanger, I don't know. They're from Germany. Asked me in the summer, what are you doing on the mount? I said, feeding pigeons and birds. Say, what they give you in return? I say, why they should give me in return? I'm just feeding them because they're hungry, you know, like so this is the stage we go to the heart. Maybe it has been very much underestimated, and kind of we've seen so many bad spirituality, and this American transcendental meditation has been such a big business, and billions of dollars are invested in that. But we just need to get to the source back. You know, I think in the art world also we forgot that, and it's so much lost. We got so much lost into, we got stuck in stories. And I am, as a storyteller, I'm abandoning my stories, you know, definitely not to have an amnesia and not to fight my own past. But apparently we are in a situation now, we just have to do our best with the things and leave the stories behind, you know, as a collective ego, all kind of stories of being a Kurdish, being leftist, being ecologist. I'm just leaving. And as my mom said, when the eye is scared, the hand should work. And just, I think we are in that stage now. And I'm mostly working with the students here and all the young generation and talking about that. We get together, and we actually, these things I collect from my trees, and we gather a group, sometimes poets, sometimes artists, different kind of musicians, and we just go on these mountains and we somehow plan them. Yeah, each time we planned like 1,000 of this, which is very resistant to heat, and it's really self-sufficient with all kind of drought. And this is the future of our country. Of course, these mountains has been sold to the rich people, and they are building buildings after another. But we are just trying to connect. And as you mentioned this word, biophilia, you said?
Yeah, biophilia, yeah.
There's something that I'm doing all the time, and and now I know how is it called.
Yeah, and it's proven. Well, Aneta, I know you're working on your PhD, but I found that was the only, I got, you know, being locked away by yourself, writing. And I found that working in the garden was the only thing that kind of got that kind of sense of, oh, anxiety away. And I was like, there's something about putting your hands in the soil and seeing things grow that.
I do it on my balcony.
Yeah.
I don't have a garden yet. But Hiwa has a garden, and we are talking about his interest in soil now. So there's a kind of major also shift in his thinking, how he's trying to kind of made a shift in his thinking, because it's more connected to cultivation, if I take it right, because it's about maintaining relations with people and somehow they dispersing what you have achieved into the lives of the others.
Yeah.
Which I think it's but this moment of accumulation was needed too, right? So to be able to give, no?
Now we are working on a little cinema, if they allow me. I have a small pickup car, and working with the students from the university to translate as much documentaries as possible and to play them in the villages here around here, mostly about what they are using, which chemicals they are using, and what they are eating, why the tomatoes look so sexy and so botoxed, and all the things. I hope the government will give me one warning at least. Because sometimes they don't.
I'm going to be building an orchard or growing an orchard with the school out in Rowlett. So it's quite a built-up area in Dublin, and we're building a multi-purpose outdoor kind of classroom that's an oversized greenhouse. But you know, we were thinking of things growing, and of course in schools, they all leave in the summertime, so that's when the harvest comes in. So instead, we're going to plant an orchard for the children. So, and it's fantastic because the principal there is very much into climbing and all the things that now in Ireland they try and stop children doing now because the place is so litigious. So there's even, you wouldn't believe it, some school playgrounds where children are not allowed to run because if they fall, their parents might sue the school. But fortunately, the school I'm working with are not like that. So we're going to plant an orchard for the children there.
Very nice.
Yeah, it'd be nice. But I was fascinated to hear about that the third order of Lex Monsanto coming in. I was not aware of that. So, I mean, you're going to send me down a rabbit hole now.
In Iraq, you mean?
Yeah.
Actually, 2011, I was here and I talked to one of the farmers, and he told me like, we are using this kind of seeds, which you cannot get anything from it anymore. After that, you have always to buy it. Luckily, there is something very good news also, that people just don't care anymore. You know, they do grow their own things in some places, and they just say because they don't pay attention that much about, you know, what the consequences could be.
What are the consequences?
Well, the country will be sued, and everyone would be sued, you know, like it would, yeah. It's if you go, because Iraq in 2003, when Paul Bremer came as a president for 11 months, he guaranteed that all these contracts should be signed with the Iraqi government. And one of them was Monsanto. So it's, and with the oil also, and all these things. But yeah, they have really very smart lawyers, but people don't care here because we don't have that much. Still, institutions are not established that way. You know, they try to make it also like sometimes in movies, they are still in European cinemas, and you can watch it here subtitled in Kurdish. You don't know where they get it from. And so these things are really very good. And so they don't care much anymore, I realize lately. So I heard from one friend of mine who's an engineer for agriculture. He said Monsanto failed here in Iraq, which is a very good news. Yeah.
Fingers crossed.
Yes, we still have to fight